Hi and welcome to Knit So Happy. Today I'm going to be showing you how to work with an I-cord. I've used the I-cord quite a bit in some of my zippered bag designs lately, and I've used it to not only bind off the stitches but also to join two sides of the fabric. So I want to show you how to work an I-cord and then an attached I-cord and how that's joining the two pieces together. So here you'll see a finished bag. It's a moss stitch on the exterior and it's got a sewn lined interior. And you'll see on the edge, all along around the zipper, we have these lines of horizontal stitches, and these are formed from the I-cord. So on this particular bag, this is the end of the knitted piece. I use the I-cord starting here to bind off all of my stitches, and then the fabric was folded in half, and I've continued to work the I-cord all along the cast on edge to join those two pieces together. And then on this corner here, the stitches were grafted together for a seamless finish, and it really makes a nice neat top edge of the bag that's much cleaner than just like the standard cast on and bind off edge. It really adds a nice polished finish to the piece. And I'm also liking that the I-cord doesn't stretch, and so for this particular type of knit item, you really don't want any stretch around your zipper, so it gives some extra structure to the bag and helps it to hold its shape, especially as you're sewing in the zipper. You don't want that to stretch out. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to show you how to work an I-cord, and I've got one stitch already going here. You'll need two double pointed needles, and you'll need two double pointed needles, and you'll need 3 stitches on that needle. So there's 1, 2, 3. All right, you'll want to slide those stitches to the opposite end, and you're going to take your working yarn, I'm going to take the working yarn from behind, so it's crossing all 3 stitches. And what that does is it closes up the back and kind of pulls it together to form a bit of a tube. So knit the 3 stitches. Most I-cord is worked in 3 stitches. Sometimes you'll see it with more stitches, but 3 I think is the most common. So now I've worked across all 3. Pull it to the end, and just repeat. Just knitting the 3 stitches. Oops, I split the yarn. Just knitting those 3 stitches, sliding to the end, and then bringing the yarn behind them. And you'll end up with this tube. Let me get the yarn out of the way. You'll end up with a little tube that's made of those 3 stitches kind of going around. All right, when you work an attached I-cord, you work it directly into your fabric. So you're not having to sew it on later, but it's actually forming this nice clean polished edge to your knitting. So here on this piece, this is my next zippered clutch that I'm working on. You'll see there's one complete piece of fabric that's going to be folded in half to form the bag. I bound off all of these stitches, which is not what I did on this green bag. Here I actually used the I-cord to bind off the stitches, which is a great technique, but what I didn't like is that that bound off edge lays much flatter than the cast on edge. There's a little bit more of a puffiness to this tube of stitches here, and I really don't like that there's a difference in that thickness. So for this bag, I went ahead and bound off all of my stitches, just a regular bind off, and then started working the attached I-cord across. I've started with a provisional cast on. You don't have to do that, you can use a regular cast on, but because I know I'm going to graft these stitches together to my live stitches at the very end, it's just easier to do if you have a couple of live stitches to do that, and I just find that I do a much cleaner job. So either cast on would be fine. It's only a couple of stitches, so it won't be that big of a deal. All right, so as you work the attached I-cord, you'll notice again I've got 3 stitches. When I started this, I started with 2 cast on stitches, and the 3rd stitch is picked up through the knitting. So I'll show you what that looks like here. Knit 1, knit 2, and this 3rd stitch, if it was the very first one I did on this end, I just picked it up through the fabric and knit it and then continued working. Since I already have one on here, I'll show you what happens next. This stitch is slipped on to the needle, and here you're going to insert your needle into the fabric just under that bound off edge. Wrap and pull a loop through. So now there's 4 stitches, a slipped stitch, and the picked up stitch. And you're just going to knit those 2 together. Oh, that's a little tight. Making sure, I think I split my yarn a little there. Hold on. There we go. And now I'm back to 3 stitches. So that picked up stitch and that slipped stitch have been joined together to form that 3rd row or 3rd column of stitches that goes along there. So as that stitch is picked up, you'll see that this I-cord is perpendicular to the knitting. So I think I've got one more left to finish off the edge of this fabric. Slide my stitches to the other end of the needle. Knit, making sure not to pull too tight so this last stitch isn't too tight. Knit, and this one is slipped. And this next stitch here, a little tricky here on the very corner. Picked up. Insert in front, wrap and pull through. So now I've reached the end of the fabric. So to join the back side of my fabric, I'm going to fold this in half. You'll see how the word knit here then would be aligned with the bottom edge of the bag. Now here I'm just going to continue working the attached I-cord just how I have been, and I'm going to pick up a stitch in this first row here just as I was working across the front, as if it's one piece of fabric. So I'm just kind of ignoring the fact that it's 2 pieces. There's going to be a bit of a gap that will get seamed later, so don't worry about that. Knit, knit, slip. I always tend to pull too tight on that very first stitch, and then I make it hard to get this next stitch picked up. So just underneath, oopsies. There we go, picked up stitch. Wrap and pull through. Just making sure your yarn doesn't come loose on that first one so that you have a gap. otherwise it will be a more noticeable join. It's a little trickier to see where you want to pick up the stitch on the cast on edge than on the bound off edge. There we go. And work those two together. All right, so now you'll see that this row of horizontal stitches from the I-cord is going to start to travel horizontally across this part of the fabric here. So you would continue to work. You can see how that's already connected together. So you're going to continue to work that I-cord all the way across to the end. Once you get to this corner, those live stitches can be grafted together, either from the live stitches from a provisional cast on, or just can be seamed if you did a regular cast on. All right, I'm going to go ahead and keep working across, and I'll show you that grafting piece next.